Well, hello, everyone.
Now the fun starts, right?
That it does. That it does. Always a pleasure, John. And, thanks for everybody joining us. So we're about to go live here on IG, on Instagram. So as soon as that comes through, we will be good to go on a multitude of platforms. This is going to be great. Yeah, it looks like everybody's hopping in and on.
There we go. Excellent. Great to be with everybody.
All right, and I'm keeping my eyes open for you to go live on Instagram with Benchmark. So
we are good to go there.
okay, there we go. And there you are, my friend. All right.
We're all about the tech. We're all about the tech
We
here,
certainly are.
So if you wanna invite, there we go. I said, oh, we are so good at this, man.
It's not my first rodeo, my friend. It's me and a glass of bubbly. I think that's why we're having bubbly, is because we can navigate all of these universes and put them into one. So cheers.
Very good, everybody. How are we getting the kickback part of it? That's how I.
Ah, I know why. Crowd goes wild. Technology and a multitude of Bluetooth devices are where you're getting that feedback from. So, now that we're here and ready to go, John, how was your day?
It's been great, man. Ready to go.
Well, very cool. So I'm here as your guest, my friend. So, John, the floor is yours.
So here on our Facebook and on our Zoom here, I'm going to share a screen because you sent me a really great PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to start with that and see how we're going to have some fun with this. And we're going to start with Champagne Gosset. So happy to be with everybody. And as I'm getting set here, Will, what is the best order that you see as people, set these wines here? We have the Rosé, we have the Grand Reserve, and then we also have the 12-year, which is amazing.
Yep, the Duzon. And I would say, so John, you're a little tinny and faint. It might be it might be your speaker or something to that effect. But I was going to let everybody know that John, the order that you had the wines, the Rosé, followed by the Grand Reserve, and then finishing up with the Duzon or the 12-year, that's the way to go. There is a method behind the madness in regards to starting with Rosé, and we'll get into that as we get into the presentation and really how the wines are made. So my name is William Davis. I'm the Director of Education for Wilson Daniels, which is a sales and marketing company based in Napa, and we also have an office in New York. We've been around since 1978. We represent 44 wineries and 46 families from around the world. You may know some of them: Schramsberg, Gosset, which we're of course tasting here, Domaine de la Romanée Conti in Burgundy, Domaine La Flève, Beyond Bisanti. The names go on and on. So my job doesn't suck.
Well, wonderful. And who are you, by the way? And who am I? I think we got so excited about the champagne here that we forgot to say who in the world we are. So first, I'm your moderator tonight. My name is Jon McDaniel. I am a paid wine drinker. I think that's the best way to look at that. I own a company called Second City Soil, which is based here in Chicago. And I work with, all sorts of different entities in supporting our wine industry, as well as I sit on the board of the United Sommeliers Foundation. And they've been such a great partner with Benchmark Wine Group and helping support our sommeliers in these very strange times. And just happy to be with everybody today and sharing these beautiful wines. Well, let's get into those.
I think that got it.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, Champagne Gosset, what I love about, this winery, and, some of the facts that I've learned about this. Just even, I used to pour Gosset, by the glass in one of my restaurants, and just always really love the quality of it, the value of these wines, which is also, really incredible. But William, why don't you just walk us through kind of a little bit about the history, because it's such a unique house. And when we talk about, champagne houses, that is something that is becoming more few and far between, as houses that have a history the way that Gosset does.
Sure. So with Champagne Gosset is the oldest house in Champagne. And this can be a little bit confusing, because when usually we think about the oldest house in Champagne, we think about the oldest house in Champagne being Ruinart, in terms of making traditional champagne, sparkling bubbles. But the Gosset family, it started back in 1584. So they were, multi-generational farmers, as well as the mayor of the small village of Ai in the Valley de la Marne. And don't forget, whenever we think about these heralded regions like Burgundy or Champagne, even Bordeaux for that matter, these are very small towns. They're quite provincial. It is, you're talking about populations in these cities between, 50 and 500 people. And that's exactly what you got in the village of Ai. There are literally three blocks, so you've got three roads going east-west, three roads going north and south, as it nestles up against the northern side of the Valley de la Marne. And the Gossets were an integral part of the history as well as the politics of this small town of Ai. So Pierre Gosset, an alderman in Ai, he was a wine grower. He established a family business, but at this time they were still making still wines. So the wines were Pinot Noir, as they are today. In this area of Ai, as it wraps around to the villages of Ambonnay. We're going to see a map a little bit later on. But in 1736, it was Jean Gosset that adopted the antique shaped bottle that you see all of your wines in today. And of course, this is exactly what you should see, because this would be, a champagne bottle with your very deep punt, extremely thick. But in 1955, that was when things really started to change. And Suzanne Gosset, she really started focusing on the quality and development, and was instrumental in changing the style of the wine to what we see it today, in terms of what they do in the winery, and how they look at the vineyard sourcing. So all of the wines that you are going to taste today are made in a non-malolactic style. Mm-hmm. And, when we taste them, you're really going to see this as a difference, a philosophical and an olfactory, difference in both the nose and on the palate, compared to most other champagnes. So after 16 generations of the Gosset family, all of them born in Ai, in 1993, they sold the winery to Renaud Cointreau. So if you think about, the same Cointreau family, of Cointreau fame. They took over ownership of Champagne Gosset, and then they launched a tête de cuvée called the Cellar, which, if you've ever tasted tête de cuvées like Dom Perignon, like DP, or Bollinger's RD, or the late disgorged, these are wines that are aged on the lees for a minimum of 10 years, and they are really stunning wines. The cool thing is that what you have for the last wine that we're going to try, the Duzon or the 12-year, is made in that exact same style. So you're going to see three very, very different wines. That again, it's really fun to see the full scope of the winery.
Yeah.
So
And I think when you look at this, it's such an amazing house as well. And, I wondered about the bottle of how that, with, modern technology and things are happening of, how that affects riddling, how that affects the aging of these wines as well with such hard, full glass here. Is that helping kind of the long aging process of still utilizing the shape and the glass that they do?
Absolutely. And, to speak to what you see here, these are the new caves. Should I say, they're old caves, but they're the new caves.
Newer.
The winery, exactly. So the
Yeah.
winery in 2009 was moved from the Village of Eye. It was very small. So their caves actually abutted up to Bollinger and Ayala's caves in the Village of Eye. Because, if you've been to Champagne, you know that Bollinger and Ayala, which are owned by the same family, they're right next to one another on the hillside, and the original Gosset house and offices are just to the south of them. Well, in 2009, they purchased a winery that was the Malakoff Winery. So it was really a turnkey operation where they were able to, in many ways, they could they could ensure that there was greater consistency in the wines, and so those caves are a good mile and a half long in the village of Epernay. So because of that, now you have a lot more room to work with. So your bottles are going to be a lot more consistent, more clean, and especially with the style of wines that they make, it was crucial that they made this move.
Hmm. I'd like to what I love about the style here is all of the different amazing long relationships that the house has had with both Premier and Grand Cru vineyards. And so I wanted to bring this slide up here in kind of the winemaking styles and also just what you're producing here, of how those long relationships has really kind of moved along the quality of even the Grand Reserve. When you think of there's no such thing as entry level when I think of Gosset, but I think the most approachable and freshest of them, but still the vineyard choices here. If you could kind of talk about some of those, that you're working with.
Sure. And I think what might be best if we go back, because there's always context, right? So if we go back one slide and we look at this map, right?
Hmm.
I think it's important for you, in order for us to understand Champagne, you have to understand the regions, or at least the sub-regions of Champagne. So in an area like the Côte de Blanc, which you kind of see, that's that thin green kind of slope that's due south of the village of Epernay, or the city of Epernay, because it's kind of a city now, it's big enough.
Yeah.
That is a completely different soil type and exposure than what you'll find in the valley where Epernay is. So that is it's a true valley, and that's the Valley de la Marne, where the Marne River runs east-west directly through that. So if you're on the south side, on that Côte de Blanc, on that slope, all of that is generally south and east facing. And actually the inset of the picture that you see next to the map, that is a great
Uh-huh.
image of what you're going to find on the Côte de Blanc. So really, high-toned calcareous matter, and it's ideal for Chardonnay. Well, as we get further north into that valley, that's where we're going to see more of uh, a little bit more clay
Mhm.
mixed with some of that calcareous matter, and that is really ideal for Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier. I think that most people that are on the call, they know that there are generally three great varieties in Champagne production: Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Pinot Meunier. But at least this gives you an idea and a context of why different grape varieties are planted in these areas. And then
Yeah.
as you look into the city of Reims, that is generally north facing with a little bit of east facing as it wraps around south of Reims, and then here on that southeastern side of the city of Reims, and that's where you're going to find a lot of Pinot Noir. Mostly in the villages of Champagne, as Ambonnet, wraps around. So Village
Mhm.
that's where you're going to find a lot of Pinot Noir. So if now we can go back to the next slide, and this gives you kind of an idea. These are the kind of the definitions and the styles that you will get from these villages, both Premier Cru and Grand Cru sites. And it's the village that has the designation of Premier Grand Cru. So over generations, over many years, these are considered to be the top villages, followed by Premier Cru, and then going into what we call regular Champagne. Not to say that there aren't great sites in some of those, lesser known villages, but here is where it's consistently good. So if we think, Avis, Grand Cru, that's Avis along with Cremant, Les Mesnil-sur-Oger, Ogier, and those are all on the Côte de Blanc. So those are all going to be driven by Chardonnay. So that's where you get that, sharp structure. You're going to get some nice body from Les Mesnil, for example, if you've ever tried Salon, for example, or some of the other, think about Krug, right? You can get weight and structure and body from Chardonnay. It doesn't necessarily have to come from Pinot Meunier or Pinot Noir. Ambonnet, again, talking about Krug as a producer, Ambonnet, absolutely phenomenal, or Ambonnet for Bollinger, or for Gosset. The Pinot Noir, and there's a little bit of Chardonnay that you find in Ambonnet as well. And it tends to be a little bit heavier and a little bit fruitier because you've got, it's driven by clay as opposed to the calcareous soils. So, we always say that Champagne is, it's greater than the sum of its parts. It's really about, the ability to make these complex, beautiful wines. And what Gosset does is that they don't think of the bubbles. They really think of making the best wine first, and then the bubbles bring it all together.
Sure.
If you follow that philosophy and that's your mantra, the accolades and the consistency will come very easily.
Mm-hmm. Now with Gosset, when you read about kind of different houses, they always kind of plant their flag with one particular grape variety, as you'll notice the thread of one variety through all of our different cuvées. Does Gosset kind of look at ranking Chardonnay or Pinot Noir kind of above each other, or is it really looking at each cuvée and how each of those particular varieties can make that cuvée as best as possible?
It's definitely the latter, because you've got this multitude of exposure as well as soil type, even through a fairly small area geographically. The goal of Gosset is, our Chardonnay is not better than our Pinot. It's how much Chardonnay do we need to blend to make this specific wine.
Yeah.
So, but the key is only sourcing from Grand Cru and Premier Cru vineyards. That is the most important thing, because again, the consistency, the pedigree, the lineage is there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I love about, you can the aromatics of these wines, and I think that, definitely with certain houses, of that choice of not utilizing malolactic fermentation, in the wine, of the aromatics of this. That's what I always love of Gosset, is how beautiful the wines are, and approachable in the nose, in the aromas. Like, I just want to, we're starting off with the rosé as the first one. If you're out there in the world and tasting, certainly, start with your rosé, and just, I keep going back to this. I'm like, man, it just smells so good. And I think that really is the balance there, and the aromatics, and just utilizing you know, the natural acidities in these you know, wines is just incredible. So you can certainly tell that that is in that house style, just allowing the grapes from these amazing vineyards to show themselves.
No, so true. And that's why we start with the rosé first, because we are looking at two grape varieties here, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
Hmm.
But there's an elegance to this wine. It's really high toned. It's not driven by weight per se, compared to the Grand Reserve, the wine that we're going to taste next, followed by the Duzon. But again, you know, you never think about that from rosé. When we tend to think about rosé, it's to give it more body. It's to, you know, maybe, you know, flesh the wine out. And with the rosé here, and there's 8% finished red wine, Pinot Noir, added to the blend, but this comes from a very specific site, um, that is actually more calcareous, strangely enough, and so it just gives you these really high, pretty notes. Uh,
Hmm.
and you know they are, you know, catching up with the rest of the world. Anyone that had been to Champagne, you know, 30, even you know, 10 years ago, what you might have seen was producers still having to farm or till their land with trash, literally trash,
Yeah.
garbage, in the vineyards, because many of these vineyards were dump sites, you know, because the proximity of Paris. The rosé is not direct pressed. So in terms of a Sanier, no. So everything here will be in a bladder press, but you know, at a very, very low pressure in order
Hmm.
to keep the juice clear, you know, for both the Chardonnay as well as the Pinot Noir. Because depending on the sites for Chardonnay, you can get a little bit of a copper note if it's left in contact too long. But the red wine is still non-malolactic, and then added at the end uh, of the base wine being fermented.
Hmm. And so the baseline here is mostly from 2013, is that right? And a little bit of reserve in there, but mostly almost predominantly 13 vintage on this.
Correct. And that's one other thing that you can do with wines that are in the non-malolactic style is that you can age them longer on the
Yeah.
lees while still maintaining that, you know, that freshness, the fruit intensity, um, and the ageability of those wines is only greatened, you know, as a result.
No, absolutely. It's such a beautiful wine, and I love you know, I love starting with this one because, you know, and I think even more so the fact that you don't utilize malolactic, you really get this, and we're almost tasting the way that we taste Burgundy. You know, you get those red fruit characteristics to it first, and then as we'll see in the second and third wine, the body and the toastiness of it increases. So I love tasting this first and really looking at this in kind of a different lens. So beautiful wine. Well, let's move on to the Grand
Thank you.
Reserve then. And you know, this is again when I always love talking about Gosset and, you know, being able to taste, you know, all these kind of different wines. This is really when you get to taste them all together. The Grand Reserve really is that, you know, calling card of what can be possible, you know, in the great value of Gosset. So we'd love to hear kind of the thought process behind this wine and how it comes together, utilizing such amazing fruit in the beginning.
Sure. So I think, was there a question that was out there in the chat?
So I see potentially, Mark, if you want to ask your question there, I know it's possible that you can if you want to. I see here actually I think you actually referred to it.
I did. In
The
terms of the rosé being direct pressed, yes.
Yeah, perfect. Well, yeah, anybody you know, that has a question as we kind of go along here, feel free to put that in the chat. And also, if you want to ask it live, or I can certainly ask on your behalf, as well as we have William here putting a lot of great knowledge about Gosset together. So at any point, we're watching the chat here. Feel free to chime in and love some of these comments. David, I love your notes about the rosé as well. Really great. I love the ginger call there. You really get kind of those kind of Asian spice notes to it. Really kind of in the back notes. So that's something on as I think it warms up a little bit in the glass too. These kind of secondary aromas are really cool.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree. And I know that, again, the question about uniqueness in farming and winemaking, winemaking, of course, everything here is going to be stainless steel. There's no oak aging at all in any of the wines. Even the Pinot Noir, the French Pinot Noir is kept in stainless. But most of that, goes back to sustainability and the length of time that because they own about 30% of the vineyards needed on their annual production. The rest are long-term contracts with families that go back hundreds of years, not only decades or generations.
Yeah, now let's do, if you could talk a little bit about, so there's, we read this in tasting notes or in kind of winery notes sometimes when it comes to French wines of what HVE is, and that's when we kind of look at high environmental value is kind of the English translation of that. And I know that Gosset has goals, with the winery of continuing to grow, HVE certifications, with their vineyards. If you could talk about that, I think it relates obviously back to, as you touched on, sustainability.
Yeah, I mean, we see similar certifications in the United States, right? No different than Salmon Safe or the Napa Green program, as opposed to it being simply organic or bio, where it's a truly holistic way of looking at not only the vineyard, but also what you do in the winery, how socially active that you are in promoting your wines and making sure that the entire winery and the people that work for it as well and your vendors are also adhering to these standards with HVE.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's Mark had a good question actually. Because we keep touching on it. I guess as you and I talk about this, we just kind of I think maybe breezed by it a little bit about malolactic fermentation. Obviously, we know about that from all red wines go through it. We talk about Chardonnay, still Chardonnay and malolactic, but we sometimes a lot of wineries, whether they do or not, really kind of don't broadcast it. So why is that something that Gosset really wants to communicate that they don't utilize malolactic in their production, and maybe some of the wineries that we might know that do utilize mallow?
Well, most houses are going to go through mallow. Uh, you know, there's a couple of reasons for that. A textural feel to the wines, the ability to blend. It's a lot easier to do that when you're working with mallowed wines as opposed to non-mallowed wines, because we're talking about wines that are going to be aged, right? The base wines are going to be aged before, and of course, while you're having that second fermentation occur in the bottle, mallow is a good thing in many ways. Now, there are a few producers that are making a couple of wines that are non-mallow, and then the rest of the wines mallow, just to create like a difference of style at the house. But Gosset is by far the largest house that is exclusively non-mallow. There's a few growers, grower champagne producers that are exclusively non-mallow. Lanson was the last large house that was non-mallow, but they've reverted back to mallow in their wines.
Yeah. Well, let's go to our Grand Reserve here. I know we keep touching on it, but the Grand Reserve. So this 45 Chardonnay, 45 Pinot Noir, and then 10% Pinot Meunier. Now, Meunier is a great variety that certainly doesn't really get a lot of respect when it comes to being kind of the third grape in the blend here. But in this particular wine, I love you know, the Meunier that kind of comes out, you know, here in the aromas and then in the texture of the wine. What really from the, you know, from the cellar does Meunier kind of add to this wine that has such approachability to it?
Well, you know, I think, you know, this is where you're going to get a little bit more of those broad-shouldered notes, both on the palate and sometimes on the nose, where only too often you're going to get some riper, you know, orchard fruit, like more apple skin, as opposed
Hmm.
to a tart apple that you might get from Chardonnay, or more of the citrus notes. Um, you know, and it is Pinot Meunier is a grape variety. It is. It's very fruity. It's very round. You know, lots of you know, black cherry. You know, very plummy, uh,
Hmm. Yeah.
and the kind of fruit flavors that are associated with Pinot Meunier. So I think that in many ways it you know, just tends to, you know, much like ice cream, right? You know, kind of fill in the cracks that you might have from the linear and the angular notes of certain Chardonnay and Pinot Noir vineyards.
Yeah. If we could on this one, because you know, I know that it's really balanced, you know, and approachable for a wine. If you can kind of touch on dosage here for a second, especially with the Grand Reserve of, you know, it really balanced and check. And I know that, you know, dosage is kind of a very fluctuating, you know, in fashion thing of, you know, we were in that very extra brute, no dosage kind of style to it as a, you know, result of, hey, we're making them kind of too large. Where's kind of Gosset at with, you know, dosage on their wines and the balance that you have here with these cuvées?
Well, I think that they generally they tend to go lower in dosage, and that is simply because when you look at weight making a wine, a great wine first,
Hmm.
you're looking at high quality fruit. Now, with the, you know, not being able to hide, and I say, you know, there's a lot of producers, there's a lot of champagne or sparkling wine in general, that the use of malolactic is there to hide some of those faults, right?
Yeah.
And the source material, you know, the raw material, the grapes. So if you're really looking at, you know, the really high quality fruit, well, you don't necessarily have to go with extremely high levels of dosage, um, even if it is non-mallowed, because you know that non-mallow you're gonna have, you know what, you're gonna have, you know, the malic acid uh, being driven in this style of wine. There's not going to be any lactic acid. So
Hmm.
generally, that sensation of acidity, you might think, well, maybe I need higher levels of dosage. I need more sugar to offset it, right? You know, it's like, well, you know, what's the point of having, you know, it's like lemonade with not sugar. But if you've got high quality fruit, the dosage here between, you know, 7 and 8.5 grams, give or take, depending on the specific blend.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's also something you need to look at in terms of the vintages that are brought to you. A vintage like 2013, there were some warm spots in Champagne and further south in Burgundy. So they did get, you know, some fairly warm weather in July and August, you know, where it was, you know, 35, 37 Celsius. So, and that's something that you usually don't get in this area.
Yeah, no, and I think that that really kind of brings, you know, that ripeness and richness there. Now, when we're looking at the Grand Reserve here, you know, I love when we kind of look at the sourcing of the grapes and kind of how the puzzle piece kind of fits together here, and the kind of the three, you know, main kind of areas that we talk about with this wine. Obviously, with Auger and also with Les Menil, you know, what do each of those you know, villages and the vineyards there and kind of add to this particular wine? So as we're tasting it, we can kind of understand further of, you know, what to pick out when we're talking about vineyard sources.
Sure. So, sorry, I'm gonna pour a little bit more for myself. Don't mind. It is after 5 in Denver. So, you know, with I here you've got you know, Pinot Noir that's driving this. So, you know,
Hmm.
in this village, so more of those Bing cherry, bright cherry notes with a little bit of structure. Avonnet So Avenay is still on the, it's in between I and Maril Senai. So it's a little higher up the hill, but still on that south slope on the Valley de la Marne. You're looking at a mixture of Pinot Meunier and Pinot Noir here. A little higher up, it can actually, you know, hold on to some of that those Pinot Meunier notes. And it's a south southerly vineyard that this is where you're going to get some of that apple skin and a little bit more of that dense richness. The Yavis is all Chardonnay. So we're going back to, you know, lemon lime, some key lime notes as well in Avis. Les Mesnil, which is further south of Avis. This is going to be, again, a little bit more of those richer orchard fruits. Sometimes in ripe vintages, it borders on tropical fruits like, you know, pineapple, where it still maintains the acidity, but there's a distinct, you know, high tone tropical note. Auger, very similar to what you're going to find with Les Mesnil. Chavot, Hautvillers, and Trapaille. Trapaille, that's in the Montagne d'Orance. With Chavot and Hautvillers, you know, if you think about Dom Perignon, and this is where the abbey of the monks and the kind of the beginnings of at least what we understand of Champagne in the traditional method began. Those are going to be Pinot Noir and Pinot Meunier as well. So Hautvillers is in a little bit of a comb, so it's just northwest of the city of Epernay. So as you look at the Valley de la Marne, what ends up happening is that, you know, if I'm looking here, then it comes down. Then there are these little rivers or combs, you know, these kind of that run in, and Hautvillers is one of those situations. So you've got both south exposure, and then you've got some exposures that are kind of, you know, east west as well because of the way that the comb comes down. Hautvillers generally gives you a fair amount of structure and just, you know, body and glycerol finished wine. Hopefully that answers the question.
No, I love it, and I love the, you know, the kind of visualization of that. Well, last but not least, so, you know, talking about Grand Reserve as you know, the blend here. So this is mostly from 2014, right? About
Correct.
80-90%, and then some reserve from 12 and 13. And as you mentioned, you know, the ability of ageability of, you know, even this non-vintage wine is really high in the complexity. So in a wine like this, that, you know, it was released, you know, disgorged in April of 18. What's the life on a wine like this that you notice where it still, you know, has the approachability balance of complexity for a non-vintage wine?
If this is the style of wine that you want and you want to maintain, you know, that mixture of, you know, fruit intensity, the brightness, I would give another 5 years, you know, no more than that. You kind of, for me, it's usually that year 8 to year 10 that things start to get a little bit more nutty
Sure.
and start to develop into those tertiary notes.
Interesting. Well, when we look at ageability, certainly, you know, we can talk about, you know, our last wine, certainly last but not least, but would love to. And this is, you know, this is for people that don't necessarily know about Gosset, or even if you have, you know, followed the house for a while, this is definitely a newer wine, a limited release wine. And we'd love to hear kind of the inspiration, you know, behind this particular wine. You know, what led the house to create it, and I know a really small production in its own.
Yeah, so the Duzon, the 12-year, it actually started with another wine called the Canzon, or the 15-year. So that was the first release, and that was back in 2015. So Jean-Pierre Marinier, who was the previous Cellier de Cave of Gosset, he unfortunately passed away in his late 50s, early 60s. And now everything is run by Odilon de Varine. Great winemaker, really thoughtful. The estate and the winery is in great hands with Odilon. Well, after the release of the Cellar wines, and the Cellar, that Tete de Gouvet, the idea was we're going to really focus on these amazing sites that we have, Old Grand Cru, that we can age on the lees for 10 years. And that was where, we started tasting these wines. They started to become, quite competent in this concept of late disgorged, very long aged wines on these. So they said, well, let's try this with a 15-year. And the 15-year, predominantly from the 1999 vintage, absolutely gorgeous vintage, pretty ripe. So that was disgorged in 2014 and then released in 2016 to the US market.
Mm-hmm.
And it was everything that you would expect. There's, it's nutty. It's driven by brioche. It's exactly what you would expect from an aged wine. But there was a lot of discussion and back and forth. It's like, well, there's brightness, there's freshness, there's all of those things you would expect because of the non-mallow style in the base wine. But we're going to tweak it and perfect it just a little bit more. So this is 2.0, the Duzon. And I think they have something very special with this wine. So the Duzon, 12 years on the lees. So most of this coming from the 2006 vintage.
Uh-huh.
A little bit of 2005, another really strong vintage in Burgundy from a perception of weight and body, just the overall quality of the fruit. Not necessarily what you would ideally want for Champagne, because the wines were a little too big from many of the villages in Champagne. But that's why you've got just a touch of that, to kind of keep the wine together and hold it in terms of structure. But that 2006, beautiful, pure, and then disgorged in December of 2019. So when you open this, and I've actually held off, you probably should open this, and you could even decant it.
Yeah, I was going to ask actually, because I think here, it's still a balance of it's still about 50-50, 51 Pinot Noir, 49 Chardonnay. But I think just the texture of this wine, and when you have that long of lees aging, the richness here, it needs some time to kind of coax itself out, and that way you get the aromatics. I think, especially with the house like Gosset, where aromatics kind of driving there, you want to give it that that bit of room. This is a wine too of, you don't need to worry about the bubbles of it. As you said, this is a wine where you can really understand how this is a great wine that just happens to have bubbles in it, and noticing and appreciating the texture of, that long of aging, and still, still pretty recently disgorged in the grand scheme.
So true. I mean, this is, I'm a fan, an absolute fan of producers that can pull this off consistently. Anything, you put me in front of a bottle of RD or Clos d'Ambonay, I'm going to go weak at the knees, right? When you've got something like this and it's in that same vein, but with just more brightness and freshness because of the non-mallow, you're like, wow, this is, it's a world-class wine.
Mm-hmm. And still pretty standard dosage here for the house. I think around 7 grams as well. So, you notice
Correct.
here of, it seems like no matter if it is for the Grand Reserve or even, for, the top wines, that there is consistency in the winemaking. There's consistency in how you kind of respect, obviously, the vineyard fruits. And it really is, each cuvee allows the expression of, when you have those controls in place, here you really notice those lees agings, the rosé, obviously, that addition of still wine. So a lot of, really kind of fun things you can understand with each of these particular bottlings.
No, so true. We've tended to joke, in the office that, the comparisons to Salon, because again, Salon is another non-mallow style.
Yeah.
But 100% Chardonnay, from Les Mines, as opposed to, Gosset being from a number of different vineyards. You know, you can have this on your weekdays and then have, you know, Salon once a month, you know, much like the analogy of Barbera or Dolcetto to Nebbiolo in, you know, in Piedmont.
Still, this could be a pretty good. I'll take this on the weekends too. Not a problem.
Yeah,
Not a problem at
no,
all.
without a doubt. You know,
Yeah.
it's, you know, and that's the thing when you see how well it can be done with both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, that you know the wine is ready to drink now.
Yeah.
At 12 years, you know, you can hold on to this, but it is something that the aging's been done for you. You know, you can simply sit there and enjoy this, and you can see that it is a step up. You know, both in the vineyard sourcing as yes, I mean, so the question was, you know, Salon is incredible, and there, you know, there is a lot of parallel with Gosset. Do you see the non-vintage consistently improving in the bottle? And as I was saying, you know, earlier, for the non-vintage wines, I think that they are best over the next 5 years after release. And then they will start to develop some of the, you know, the tertiary notes that we see in the Duzon, for example. So it really comes down to what you personally enjoy. Do you want something that's bright and that's fresh and that's really expressive in the fruit sense, or do you prefer something that has more of the marmalade notes in terms of a fruit set, or you know, again, more of those biscuity, nutty notes in your wines, and you know that's different for kind of everyone.
Yeah, and what I love about, you know, this one too, when we talk about, you know, the obviously the structure and the ageability here, you know, is the first time that I saw this, you know, the 12-year on the Lees wine, the Duzon, of what a great value it is, even at this. Like, I would put this in a lineup with the prestige cuvées of several of the houses that we all know and love, and this holds its own, and it is half the price. And still the ability of just really bringing that kind of richness there and texture in this wine, but still, you know, an incredible value out of it too.
True. You know, unfortunately, I just wish that there were more of it that came to the United States. We were able to, you know, of the 2,000 cases produced, we were able to get 250 for the United States. So, you know, it's a fair amount if you think back globally. But yeah, most of the Duzon we've sold out in the United States, even with COVID.
Yeah, and there's a question too about, as you mentioned with this, with the Duzon of decanting, how would that, does it help with the other non-vintage wines of, do you need to do that to help with the expressiveness, or out of bottle for like the Grand Reserve or the Rosé, that that really kind of doesn't need to help it along?
Um, Whenever I get that question, it depends on the bottle. I
Okay.
know that sounds weird, but sometimes you can get, you know, we talk about it in the industry, you know, reductivity,
Yeah.
you know, where there's a little bit of, you know, sulfite, you know, that's that you know that matchstick that tends to mask over whatever fruit that you're trying to get, you know, any of the aromas that you're trying to get out of the wine.
Mm-hmm.
So if you notice that it's muted, then yes, decanting might make sense to you. But you know, I think one of the most important things is your glassware.
Okay.
Simply,
Why is that specifically with Gosset? Because I've gotten the Olivier Krug dissertation on this as well. So what for? Because that's, you know, I've pulled out the white wine glass for this too. Why is it so important for Gosset wines, you know, to have that kind of you know, that glassware?
well, you know, I think that many of us were trained, especially in the restaurant business, you know, back in the 80s, 90s. Um, it was flutes, you know, that was the glass size and shape that you needed, unless it was going with the Marie Antoinettes, you know, the wider ones. Uh,
Hmm.
But as we start to, see these wines, and especially if the wines are made as wine first and then bubbles second, why wouldn't you put them in a glass designed for white wine? So if we put it in a glass with a much wider rim, that allows you to aerate the wine in the glass as opposed to decanting. So you kind of get the best of both worlds, right? You maintain bubbles, so you know that you're still tasting a traditional method wine, but at the same time you're also giving the chance for the wine to aerate in glass, and to have some of those unwanted aromas waft off.
Sure. Well, wonderful. As I put a comment in the chat here, if there are any other questions that anyone has on these beautiful wines, on Gosset, on Champagne, please certainly let us know. As we're kind of wrapping up here, the ability to find these wines, as William alluded to, these are not wines you can find everywhere. But on Benchmark's website, and I actually just checked before we started this, there's some really, kind of cool, that we have some magnums of Grand Reserve. Obviously, there are a few bottles left of the 12-year. There is some Celebris as well. So if you want to check out the website and access more of these wines, definitely go to Benchmark Wine Group and just put Gosset in the search, and you get all these different amazing cuvées. And as we've talked about throughout this, some really, really great values, as well. And so a final question I see here from David, if you can touch, William, on the prolonged climate change. Obviously is a discussion that we're having in every region in the wine world, some for the worse if you're in Germany, some for the better. But how is that really affecting Gosset in their work in the vineyards, obviously, as they continue to grow with HVE as a focus in sustainability, and where their focus is related to climate change now?
Wow. We have 6 minutes. Where do we really begin there? Yeah, there's a number of different things that Champagne Gosset and other producers in Champagne are doing to combat the effects of climate change. One of the easiest, of course, is, well, we'll just pick the fruit earlier. We'll harvest earlier. And we've seen that, consistently around the world. We're looking at, instead of, picking in late August, we are now picking in the middle of August for much of this fruit. But they're also looking at, very small changes, whether or not it's, looking at specific rootstocks that might be utilized in order to combat hydric stress. Things of that nature that will still enable the fruit to be physiologically ripe while being harvested earlier. Mm-hmm. It's also utilizing different cover crops, in many of these vineyards, although, most of these areas are kind of run bare because, you've got a monoculture. These grapes and these vineyards have been there for centuries. It's also, looking at maybe changing the direction of your vineyards. Instead of having them in a conventional north east-west, you might put them in a north-south to, affect or change how much sunlight and how much photosynthesis is occurring in many of these vineyards. That's just a beginning in terms of
scratching the surface on a very complicated discussion, for sure.
Yeah, it's there's so many different things that are happening right now, but I think for Gosset, for them it's really paying more attention to the vineyards throughout the year. There was a time when everybody was, you go on vacation, you go on holiday in July, and then you come back the first week of August after being off the entire week of July, because that's what everybody does in France. But now we're starting to see more people spending more time in the vineyards, really, looking at precision viticulture, utilizing different technologies, and being there and being available to combat anything that's going on and to be more aware of what's happening in the microclimates of these vineyards, and it's helping the wines.
Yeah. Well, certainly something to, as we continue to discuss that, to keep an eye on, especially for, a region like Champagne where, climate is really, to capture the acidity and to, make sure that ripeness is, we're not fighting against that. I know is always a concern. So wonderful. Well, William, thank you so much for bringing such amazing knowledge to everybody here and related to Gosset and related to Champagne, and some of those nuggets that I pulled away from that. It was great to hear your views on that. For everyone, again, you can access the Gosset wines through Benchmark Wine, benchmarkwine.com, and to get some of these Gosset wines, if you drank all what you have tonight or want to grab some more for your cellar. And our next tasting is actually going to be on the 25th with an approach to relaxation, one of my favorite wineries from Australia that, William, I know that you know Richard and Carla very well also. So we're going to be tasting their
Mr.
amazing project from the Barossa Valley in Vinevale. So if you haven't tasted Australian Grenache or Semillon before, definitely check out what we're going to be releasing there. And you can taste along and buy the package as well. So again, William, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you to everybody for joining us this evening, and keep following along Benchmark Wine Group on social media and also the website, and sign up for all the fun stuff that we'll be up to in the future. So cheers, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye, guys.